Let's get started. So thanks so much, everyone, for joining. Culture is something we hear organizations talk about often. They want to foster one, they want to improve theirs, and they want to build on a culture that's working. But is culture something that can be measured? Does it actually drive conduct and key business metrics? In a word, yes. My name is Emily Miner, and I'm a Senior Ethics and Compliance Advisor here at LRN, where I lead our culture practice. If you're familiar with LRN, we help companies around the world inspire their people to do the right thing by providing ethics and compliance solutions that center values and elevate behavior. I'm excited to explore this topic today and even more excited to hear from our distinguished guests. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items to note. We have a Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen, so throughout the session, please feel free to drop in any questions. We're going to leave 10 minutes at the end for questions, and if we're not able to get through those questions, then we'll be sure to connect with you after the webinar. This session is also pending approval for up to 1.2 CCB CEUs. So if you plan to claim these credits, be sure to stay on until the end, and we'll send out the certification a few days after in our follow-up email. Okay, so on to the good stuff. This webinar is coming on the heels of new research that LRN published last week, our 2021 Benchmark of Ethical Culture report. Based on a comprehensive survey of thousands of employees at corporations around the world, this multi-year collaborative research effort explores how ethical culture both protects corporate reputations and propels the bottom line. I'm really excited to introduce our guests who are going to be sharing how they're bringing a focus on culture in their organizations and how they are moving the needle on some critical facets of culture, putting these ideas into practice. So first we have Ula Ubani, who's the Vice President, Ombudsperson, and Chief Ethics and Conduct Officer at BMO Financial Group, a publicly traded, diversified financial services company serving more than 12 million personal, commercial, corporate, and institutional customers in North America and internationally. Scott Sullivan is the Chief Integrity and Compliance Officer at Newmont Corporation, the world's leading gold company and a producer of copper, silver, zinc, and lead. Newmont is the only gold producer listed in the S&P 500 index and is widely recognized for its principled environmental, social, and governance practices. And finally, Teresa Nelson is the Director of Global Compliance at Simpson Manufacturing, a publicly traded company that designs, engineers, and produces structural products. Considered a leader in structural systems research, testing, and innovation, Simpson is one of the largest suppliers of structural building products in the world. Ula, Scott, Teresa, thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
So we're going to kick things off with a quick audience poll. So Carol, if you don't mind pulling that up on the screen. Do you have a sense of the current state of your company's ethical culture? So you can, anywhere from we have a strong grasp, we know some things, it's more of a gut feeling, or we're not really sure, and that's fine too. We'll give it another 15 seconds or so. Okay. Carol, can you toss up the results? Okay, so about 40, a little over 40 have a strong grasp. 20% we know some things, 30% it's more a gut feeling, and 4% we're not really sure. All right. Well, I am going to now open it up to our panelists to talk about this. So Teresa, Scott, Ula, how are you understanding and thinking about your culture? And I'd love if you could also kind of think about specifically, like what specific metrics, I mean, culture is this kind of big term, it can mean a lot of things. what specifically are you looking at when you think about and try to understand culture in your organizations? Who wants to go first?
I'll go. So, when Bart Simpson started the company in 1956, he outlined the essential attributes for company and employee success. Those principles of business are our company values, and we refer to them in our culture as secret sauce. And as we grew geographically and as we were offering more products and services, there was an intentional focus on ensuring that his message and legacy remained strong. So today, the metrics I look at and track are through our culture and leadership assessment. We partner with LRN. We look at hotline activity and risk assessment results. And all of these get discussed through our compliance steering committee. The ELT is a member of the steering committee, as well as some SLT members and some functional leaders. And then I also present regularly to the audit committee through the through the board of directors. So that's how we focus on it in compliance.
And I'm happy to jump in. So from an ethics point of view, so BMO is a bit different than a lot of companies and most companies in that we separated ethics from compliance. And we did that several years ago. And that's really to allow to really focus and go deep on things like values and on ethical decision making. And from that perspective, at BMO, we look at culture. There's broad company culture, corporate culture. And within that, there's a subsection of ethical culture. There's also culture of compliance. But from a metrics point of view, or the things that we track, and it's through regular surveys really, is just the behaviors that would indicate that people feel comfortable, understand where the ethical culture boundaries lie, know what to do about these items. If they were to see something, they would know how to escalate it. Do they see modeling around them that signifies that we truly do have an ethical culture and things of that nature? We also have the other kind of stats too. So hotline statistics, investigations and misconduct, and also disciplinary items. But for me, I see them kind of at the back end, somewhat like middle and the back end, whereas those questions around, do I see the behaviors that would signify an ethical culture happening in my day-to-day business, are more predictive for me and a little bit earlier. So that's how we track it.
And Hula, did you say that that you're tracking those metrics around behaviors through surveys?
So they've always been in our annual survey, but now we have moved into another method of more frequent micro surveys, which is great. So we'll probably have, I don't know if it's 3 to 4 per year, and we can really zero in down and see how people are responding to these very, very specific questions. There are other questions on the survey too, all around culture, but these are the ones that are sub, because we know that we have subcultures within the organization. So how do you actually influence the culture where it's actually happening is something that we actually spend a lot of time on.
That's awesome. Yeah, the micro surveys, kind of more getting a more continuous measurement is seems to be a growing trend. So
you can respond quickly, right? Yeah, so exactly. It moves you off the annual survey, big plan, big response, take six months to think of a plan and respond, and then the survey happens again. This is quick, so you can respond within weeks of having results, which is good.
What about you, Scott?
Yeah, when I think of culture, it really, in my opinion, is the most precious and probably underrated asset in your portfolio. I think it does require a lot of constant, sort of consistent cultivation and nurturing. So it really is sort of a delicate flower, right, in some respects, and it can really dramatically change in the blink of an eye. So these little changes in a microculture all of a sudden could sort of begin to overtake your broader culture. And I like to think of it a little bit on sort of the English history side of the brain versus the math and science. And so compliance is typically the math and science, 1 + 1 = 2. And the culture side is really the English history. It's a little bit softer. It's not as easy to measure. it's a bit more squishy. Leaders don't feel as comfortable with that as they do adding 1+1. So I think it really is something that has to be constantly nurtured and evolve over time. In terms of metrics, I don't think we're as advanced as ULA's program is, but we've really started to focus on what we thought were key metrics to track organizational justice and fairness. So we've been looking specifically tracking and reporting out to the ELT, the audit committee, and to the employee base at large, discipline by level. So we really think that's one that resonates quite well. And we try to watch for not just tone at the top, but conduct at the top. So when a leader takes a shortcut or somebody does a sort of an end run around something, that really becomes something that sticks out pretty quickly. And the frequency at which the topic is talked, when we've done our ethical surveys, we've seen that as the greater frequency, the greater you see of a destigmatization or a normalization of speak up culture. And so we really found that to be a key to help us move from a speak up culture to a listen up culture, where we shift the onus to the organization to create that safe environment and not put the onus on the victim or the aggrieved party to be the one, well, why aren't you speaking up?
Yeah, and so you mentioned kind of two things in terms of how you're tracking, how you're tracking against organizational justice and fairness. So one is kind of your like reporting and investigation process and all of the data surrounding that, actions taken, et cetera. And then you also mentioned surveys. Is that okay? So
yeah.
So a common thread between the three of you. And yeah, I mean, I think that's we conduct research every year as well into ethics and compliance kind of program effectiveness and practices, and certainly that's consistent with what we're seeing in our data around, the methods that most organizations are using to try to, wrap their hands around this squishy, as you said, Scott, squishy culture. We do see that the kind of the larger, annual or biannual or whatever it is, survey, and then the data around, reporting and investigations, hotline, et cetera, tend to be the two most common methods, vehicles. But as I said, we are also seeing kind of a rise in these short, more targeted, pulse surveys, focus groups, roundtables, and then there's some interesting new research that's coming out around, mining things like Glassdoor reviews and social media posts as well. So data can come from all different corners. And on the topic of data, so Teresa, you mentioned the culture and leadership assessment, and I know that Simpson, you've been pretty rigorous about measuring culture for several years. We've had I've had the pleasure of partnering with you for several of those years. But more importantly, you've taken action as a result of those insights. It's better to do nothing if you're not going to, better to not ask the question if you're not prepared to do anything about the answers. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about what that process has looked like at Simpson and the impact it's had on the organization, on ethical conduct, or any measures of ethical culture.
Oh, sure, I would love to. Thanks. But first, familiar disclosure: the opinions and the observations I express are my own and should not be construed as those of Simpson Manufacturing or Simpson Strong Tie. Sorry, had to do it. Yes, I think we were pretty rigorous in our cultural measurement. But when we first started out, it was an in-house survey that I did and had translated, and I compiled the data. We got some really great feedback and data, but I should say that I just could never move past reporting the results to any significant organizational change. So after a couple of rather frustrating attempts, I was challenged by our CEO to come back with benchmark data and a means to kind of conceptualize what the results meant in the context of our industry and in business in general. So enter LRN. Emily, your team really worked with our unique challenges. We have 22 countries, 14 languages, offline blue collar workers and online white collar workers, as well as some pervasive historical confidentiality concerns. So we were kind of a mixed bag starting out. We conducted our first CLA in 2018 and followed up with some focus groups in our manufacturing facilities to kind of just dig into those results. And one of the things that I insisted on was an open-ended free text response question in our CLA. And I know the lawyers in the group are going to kind of cringe at that, but we have it, one of our basic tenets is that open door. And I really felt it was important to have our employees have the option to really express their opinions and really speak up. So we went with it. LRN was really great about preparing our SLT members on how to receive that feedback and to really just look at it and review it in the spirit in which it was given. And so we were really lucky. We got some really great responses there. Emily then worked with our ELT to help articulate what the results meant to them. Instead of just looking at the results as just data, it was really about personalizing those results in the context of our company values. And so the communication of the results was top down. Our ELT went to each of our locations personally and spread the news of the results, and were able to share what those results were, how they were meaningful to them, and what actions were going to be taken. We started a CLA team that represented HR, organizational development, communications, quality, and compliance. And we got together to kind of prioritize those post-survey action items. And one of the things we had some statistically, I can never say that, statistically significant, I don't know responses around observation of misconduct or how to speak up. And so we really focused first and foremost on communicating to the organization what misconduct is. We repurposed a few things. We rewrote our whistleblower policy that was ill-named reporting financial misconduct. It was a holdout from SOX era, I think. And so we renamed it and repurposed it as a speak up, listen up policy. I think, Scott, that was a really good observation, is that put the burden on the organization to listen and to identify those moments. We implemented for the first time a hotline, a whistleblower hotline that was just not in our company culture. We felt that open door was covering it, but the results indicated otherwise. And so we were wanting to offer up some other avenues. We proposed and got budget for a rewrite of our code of conduct, really just a rebranding and repurposing of our code of conduct. It was a stale 2-page document on our intranet, and now it's a beautiful, culturally supportive document, and we got that rolled out. We also, which I really was very happy with, was we partnered with our organizational development team, and we had all of our leadership training courses incorporate critical conversation training and listening up training, as well as mapping the leadership skills they were learning to our company values. So there's some real world applications there. And one of the things that we learned from the focus groups, which I we benefited so much from having people come in and really talk through the survey, but also express what they meant by those comments and their survey responses, was that we really needed as an organization some more instructive communication materials about how to live our values. Everybody knows our values, but really, what does it mean when we say, relentless customer service, or everybody matters, or, have fun and be humble? Those things were part of our conversation, but how to actually put them into action were not. So we created this around 3 core goals: building trust, speaking out and listening up, and showing each other they matter. We created these accountability behaviors that they were stated in a form of a discussion prompting question, like, do I have direct and honest communication? Do I show genuine interest when listening to others? Or do I encourage varying perspectives, viewpoints, and ideas? And then we created this framework, which was designed to have the functional leaders and managers talk to their teams about these goals and about these accountability behaviors. And it really did bring the conversation all the way through the organization. But all of this took a lot of time to get to that point, and we were just rolling it out when the pandemic hit. And it came right at the same time that we were going to do a follow-up CLA. And so we had to have some really,
Quick interjection there, Teresa. There was a comment asking what CLA is. So I'm just going to jump in. Culture and leadership assessment.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I should define my terms. But yes, culture and leadership assessment. And so what happened was we had to have a conversation about, do we do a survey during a pandemic when our workforce was dispersed? We had a lot of stress on our production staff. And, I think our CEO really took it as an opportunity to get some good feedback on the crisis response. So we added a second question, a free text question about how is our COVID response? And so we plowed through and we adapted and we did the CLA again in 2020. And we really had some surprisingly supportive results. Our participation was up 4%. So we had about 79% participation, which I think is fantastic. 53% of those people who participated left a comment, and we got nearly 2 times the many people leaving comments in 2020 as 2018. We showed increases in all of the dimensions, and we surpassed the manufacturing benchmark in all of those as well. One of the things I was really happy to see was that we had an 8% reduction in the I don't know response, which was super great, that people were starting to now understand what we were talking about and what we were trying to measure. And then one of the results that I'm very proud of was that we had overwhelming positive response to our leaders' COVID response. And the comment shared a direct link from the leaders speaking about our values to the employees and the employees' response to those actions. So it was really great to see that. And it kind of gave permission, I think, to speak about our values, not in a bragging way, but in a real life, practical way of what it means to, live those values. So it was a really great experience. And we are looking forward to our follow-up CLA, but that has been delayed a little bit more as we've been working through how do we do these discussions in a dispersed workforce and do some of these post-survey things. But it's been a real good process, and it's just been very supportive of how our values resonate with our employees. So that's really great.
Yeah, and one of the things that I love about the story that you shared and the experience is that the areas where Simpson decided to focus. I mean, as we've said several times already, culture is this big thing. You can't really, you can't focus on all of it at the same exact time. And so, the areas where Simpson chose to focus, around, how do we bring our values to life, leaders and their role in as, champions to the organization, and creating those, I don't remember what you called it, but the discussion guide toolkit things, where leaders could, facilitate these conversations, demonstrating that tone from the top, tone from the middle, that role modeling, and then the leadership communication, the EL, executive and senior leadership communication, those ended up being the areas where you saw the greatest improvement. And so it's like, and then supported by the employee open-ended comments that, specifically called out those actions. It's just it's like on one hand, it's sort of like, well, yeah, that makes sense. But on the other hand, it's also still just gratifying to see it play out. And I'm going to share my screen really quickly because you shared let me minimize the.
Yeah.
You mentioned the code, and you talked about it being shifting from a 2-page document to something that is more fully embracing of Simpson and your culture and you talk here people-centered culture. But yeah, anything you want to say about this?
Yeah, so the code is at the top, I guess, left on your side, maybe, but the top, that's our code. And it's a beautiful document, and we were very proud of that. But then following up with it was our 2020 annual report. And so those pictures on the right-hand side are the annual report. And it was really nice to see how that values discussion cascaded throughout the organization, not just in conversations, but also in our materials and in our meetings. We just had this very intentional conversation about it and really started highlighting it. And it's just such a beautiful representation of our company. I'm very proud of it. It's very nice.
Thanks for sharing that.
No, thank you.
So, in our research, we looked at culture kind of broadly speaking, and as you've just shared, Teresa, how to measure culture broadly speaking. But then we also wanted to understand what are some, are there any elements of culture that have, an outsized impact on, different organizational variables. And one of the things that we found was that trust and organizational justice kind of very, strongly far and above other dimensions of culture were most predictive of whether people behaved ethically, particularly when under pressure. So to kind of bring us now, into some more specific elements of organizational culture and how you can foster and bring that to life. Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you. You shared at the beginning that organizational justice and fairness are, the two foci of Newmont. So how are you, actively seeking to move the needle on organizational justice?
Yeah, so I think when it presents itself, you should never let a good crisis go to waste. It is a cultural opportunity. There's a reset possibility or a direct messaging situation. So we had a couple of senior leader cases that happened with us that went through our investigation process that led to exits from the organization. So we really focused on transparency, clarity, and probably more importantly, consistency. So the first one happened, and then people say, "Ooh, wow, this happened, et cetera." But they're really saying, "Okay, is this an aberration, or it's just a one-time event?" So you sort of see news stories that come out about somebody getting exited from an organization, or is this really the way culturally we're going to operate, where you provide as much transparency as possible? And I think it's really important to remember that employees are always watching, so they're looking for organizational signals. Expectations of this is our culture versus this is what really is our culture. So they want to see actions and not words. And there's a couple of great buzz phrases out there, but what you permit is what you permit is what you end up promoting, right? In terms of your culture. And so I think there are some organizational litmus tests that you can look to that are out there. A phrase that I love is, just because something's lawful doesn't mean it's not awful. So there's a couple of great ones there that we really try to pay attention to and focus on when we're looking at sort of these cultural opportunities that present themselves. So we really took the route of what I would consider to be more radical transparency, whereas you usually have a situation where something happened to somebody in some location and something happened to that person in the organization. And that's kind of what it's left at. So employees, maybe they connect the dots, maybe they don't really understand that. So we went a lot further and ran some risks with that. But we decided that for advancing our culture, for nurturing and cultivating that culture, we were very transparent externally and internally. in terms of presentations, materials that were shared, details that were shared. And it's really been illuminating for our culture. And the feedback that's come from the organization is, wow, we get it. These are really kind of crystallized in our minds now, and we understand where the lines are, and we understand what happens, the consequences, both good and bad, from a case that comes up. And so it's really been a watershed event for us in terms of getting that focus on culture and driving that organizational justice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and when you shared, when you shared this example with me earlier, I was so struck by the radical transparency that Newmont has taken. I think it's really unique, and I haven't come across that in many organizations. And in our work with companies around these topics, we're always advocating for be transparent, bring in real examples. Of course, you can sanitize them, but you don't want to get to the point that you just said where it's someone somewhere did something and then something happened. That's not really helpful. And some pushback that we often get is, this exposes us to legal risks, or there's, confidentiality issues, and I'm certainly, those are real and present, and I don't want to minimize that. But can you talk a little bit about how that discussion played out and kind of what you were weighing? Because as you said, Newmont, went so far even as to make a public, external facing sort of acknowledgement of some of the senior misconduct. So, beyond even just discussing it internally, you discussed it externally. How did that decision play out?
So I think it's a big part of that is having the right people at the table to have that discussion and to have an open and frank discussion about where your culture presently is, where you want that culture to go, and do you really need to break a mold? And so, look, we had those same discussions that everybody has: data privacy, confidentiality, legal risks, et cetera. At the end of the day, collectively, we looked at these opportunities and said, do you sort of address the cancer in the body, or do you address the entire surviving body afterwards, right? So we want to make sure that the individuals that are 99% of the population is doing the right thing each and every day. They may face a challenge or a bad issue. That's the group we want to focus on. We don't want to benefit or reward the wrongdoer. So we really looked at the calculus quite differently. And at the end of the day, came to the conclusion, and you have to have senior leadership involved. You have to have the general counsel involved. You have to have everybody in the organization, the communications group in line with that. And look, there is some risk for that. And I certainly understand that organizations will do things differently, but for us, it was the right decision at the right time. And it's a journey. It's not like you go from 0 to 60 overnight. So there had been progressive increasing transparency at the organization over the years. And it just felt like the right opportunity and the right time, and not letting that good crisis go to waste, to really advance the culture. And the feedback has been uniformly positive. Moral clarity. We know what happened. We understand what happened. We get it. So it's been very positive to date.
Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask what the feedback internally had been. That's awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
And Ula, I want to turn to you because one of the things that Teresa mentioned earlier was around kind of values or principles and bringing them to life. And this has been such a focus for BMO, and our research in this latest report on ethical culture, but also the research that we've been conducting for nearly 30 years, kind of consistently points back to the importance of values and their role in shaping the role that they should have in shaping how organizations and individuals are behaving. And I was actually, you and I were on a conversation a few weeks ago with the joint session between the European and American Business Council, and someone there had a comment of, it makes sense that organizations that are already kind of oriented around values, that they would draw on them to inform their COVID response. But outside of this kind of big crisis moment where, like, yes, everyone's, connecting to values and purpose, how do you do, like, what about when you're not in a crisis? What's the regular day-to-day, and how do you bring values to life in the day-to-day? And, that's I think where BMO has done such a great job. So I'd love for you to share about how you are and BMO is bringing that focus and bringing your values to life.
Yep, happy to. So several years ago, we redid our values, and we created new values that were focused on while we were doing that. It was an iterative process, and with full disclosure, we used LRN as one of the partners to help us get there. And when we were putting them together, the thinking was, how could they be actionable? So we really wanted to move from values that were just there on a wall to things that people could actually use in their day-to-day thinking and their day-to-day work. And also we had to tie them to our code of conduct, or the code of conduct based on our values, basically. And so all of that work happened at the same time. So that was incredibly helpful. And in putting the values together, and our 4 values are integrity, responsibility, empathy, and diversity, putting them together, and the work that was that went into landing there was a lot of work. It was months and months and months of actually landing on 4 values for a 200-year-old at the time institution. Out of that came, then the next question is, well, how do you make them real? Like, how do you actually translate them into something? If we want people to actually be able to use them for decision making, what other tools can we provide to help with that? And we ended up with 9 behaviors that we crafted, and they were kind of the fallout from the whole values creation work. And I'm truncating it because I'm just thinking of time now, because there was a ton of work, but I'm just trying to be succinct. And the way we then proceeded was to take those 9 behaviors and embed them in everything that we do. So there was a campaign to introduce them. There was branding around them. We actually called them being BMO at the time. And it was things that weren't actually super complicated. It was like kindergarten type things, like help other people, help others to succeed. Sorry, make it your own problem. How do you push things forward? Speak up, be candid, be direct. So it was just these things that when you think about it are not rocket science, but when you actually focus on them, they make a difference. So we branded them, rolled them out, and incorporated them into performance appraisal. When you're looking at how somebody did at the end of the year, those behaviors actually signify the how. So it's not just the what, it's the how you actually get there. And we use them to kind of branch off into many, many different ways, and to just keep on repeating them, basically. So really, when you're thinking of adults, which is what all of our employees are, you have to reinforce things over and over again. So once is not enough. Once a year is certainly not enough. You have to find ways to kind of like let it creep in. One of the cool things we did, so then several years passed, and we're always trying, in the ethics and conduct office, we're always trying to think of how can we make sure that people understand how to do the right thing. How can we make sure that they really, like, at the point where you're going to make a decision that will have an impact, that you make the right decision, the best decision, because that lawful but awful phrase is something that I also use too. So we can just follow the rules, but we have customers, we have consumers that are entrusting us with something very, very valuable, and it's their financial well-being. So how do you make sure that we're actually doing what we should be doing? We created this character and this concept that we've used. We probably have, 8 or 10 videos now, different videos, different issues. And we actually brought them out again during COVID to talk about how do you handle working from home. And the gratifying thing was we did this about 3 years after the behaviors were introduced. And it's all employees, real employees, and they were unscripted. So they volunteered to be in this fun video, and we asked them questions and they answered from the heart. So it was really gratifying for me to hear all the things, speak up, do what's right, all those kind of things were things that we had kind of been reinforcing for years, and employees understand it. So I think that's why I wanted to show. So there's like 2 points. It's using humor to have an impact, and then also showing that repeated influence actually does make a real difference.
Yeah, I love the actions matter lead character. Like, it's just, he's so perfect for it. And one of the things that there's sort of 2 things that I'm struck by in your sharing. One, what you just said about the repeated exposure. It's not enough to do it once or once a year, and finding fun ways of bringing a focus on it, such as through actions matterly. So that's one. And then the other thing that I was struck by, you did all this work to create values, to identify behaviors or actions that kind of bring that to life and are measurable. But then the putting it into practice, even beyond that. And so incorporating it into performance evaluations that you mentioned, that's such a powerful tool for sending signals. So I think, Scott, you talked about sending signals. That's such a powerful way to send signals that this is something that we really care about, so much so that it's factored into how your performance is measured at the end of the year or throughout the year.
And and the thing on the performance, it begins with employees, like, tell us how you embody these actions, right? So you have to, so then that actually elicits thinking, versus a manager saying, this is what I saw you do, or I didn't see you do. So it actually starts the conversation that when you're putting together your appraisal, your first draft, it's like, so tell us, what do you think? How did you do this? And what are you going to focus on for next year? So that really needs to be 2 ways. And it doesn't work if it's just from the top down, this is what you need to do. Because people know what they have to do, but they don't do it anyway. So how do we do something different?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So a common thread in our discussion has been, I think, really the amount of focus, attention, intention that all of you, and Simpson, Newmont, BMO have brought to this topic of how do you foster a healthy, ethical culture. So in a world of not enough time, not enough money, something else is more pressing, how are you doing it, and is it worth it? Maybe a kind of 60 seconds each to share any reflections or advice you have for your peers that are on this webinar. And maybe we'll go we'll kind of go back around the horn. So Teresa, what are your reflections or advice?
Yeah, it's definitely worth it. And it was very worthwhile to see that the results from the follow-up survey really did reinforce that those behaviors and those intentional conversations around values actually do help move the needle and see behavioral shift, or at least acceptance, from the corporate body, if you will. For me, the thing that really helped move our needle was when I stopped focusing on why I wanted to do it and what I thought was important, and really connected with each of our leaders on what our values meant to them and what the results of the surveys meant to them, and really starting to key it into their motivations and reasons for promoting culture. It really did then start opening up funding for projects, but also opened up new avenues and ways of doing things. And I think it was like with the focus group, listening to the people that participated really gave us that light bulb moment of it's instructional guidance on behavior we need, not more, not just another policy. So it was really, I think it was making it personal, listening to the others on how behavior is shaped by value conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about you, Scott?
Well, I think sort of similarly, there's a nice piece there that is, look, the survey provides data but then it's behavioral science that goes on there. How do you make change that's positive in the organization? I think it does not have to be, so the culture change or the cultivation efforts do not have to necessarily be expensive or massive. So if you get a core dedicated group of leaders who get it and understand this, because again, it's that English, history, math, science of the brain, and some of it, for some folks, it is really hard. If you have that crisis opportunity or an event to leverage that you can use, it doesn't have to be something that happened to you. It could be within your industry or something like that. Mm-hmm. And the frequency and the signaling concepts we talk about in comms and messaging and surveys, and making it, as Teresa just said, making it truly your own, truly customized. So you always remember when you go to outside law firms or consultants, everything wants to be right size, fit, tailor, customized, and that's where all the cost is. And sometimes you can just take something off the shelf and tweak it. I think with culture, it really does have to be your own. It's one of the true areas. I think it really has to be customized or tailored to you and your organization. I also think what gets measured gets done. So when you start to bring this data to the forefront, as you see, you get resources, there's other avenues that open up. The one thing I would caution about is be careful you don't get sucked into something that could be superficial. So you've got to make sure that you have the right drive and commitment in the organization to do this right, because there could be ways to sort of wash the answers and responses. Oh, well, this is just a unique thing here. It's not really a problem. Mm-hmm. And it is a big, if you're doing surveying, the data, it can be a data tsunami. So having the right partner and the right organizational folks to help you sort through that and transform it into bite-sized actionable insights. That's why I love ULA. I'm taking notes, ULA, about just kind of doing the micro burst in surveys of not having this, because again, that's kind of where we are. You have this huge data set and you feel like you got to have these massive plans. By the time you get to A to Z, it is 6+ months and the data is already stale and people are looking around like, well, whatever happened to the survey? So I think doing it more with greater frequency is a great way to ensure that it remains relevant and not stale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what about you, Ula?
Think of something different now. Something to add to the richness of the conversation. I think time and money, and not a lot of either. I would find a partner within the organization with whom you can partner with. Another, like whether it's HR or whether it's employee relations or legal or law or whatever, whoever, to kind of get somebody else to support the view that you need to do this, because an organization's trust with whomever their actual stakeholders are is so important. And the minute that it's broken, it's really, really hard. It's going to cost way more time and money to fix it. So why do we manage the culture and make sure that people are all moving in the right direction is kind of huge. So that's what I would do. In addition to everything else that was said here, I would try to find somebody else to actually work with rather than just being on your own, beating that drum, because it doesn't always work necessarily that way.
Absolutely. And I want to share, I'm going to share my screen one more time and show, this is the OJID, I love that name, Organizational Justice and Integrity Dashboard of Newmont. So this is a sanitized example of something that is published. Is it quarterly, Scott?
Quarterly.
Okay, yeah. So, published internally to the organization, some, information here on conflict of interest. Okay, we switched helpline providers, but then this, bringing it to life. So what happens? And then describing the process of when people use your helpline, what happens, and breaking that down, providing that data, and being that radical transparency that you were talking about. And then, you also talked about, describing kind of how this varies by role in the organization. So you've got here the discipline mix by level and type. So again, kind of reinforcing that message to employees that leaders are held accountable, the same as anyone else in the organization. So I think it's a great example of, very low budget, no budget way of spreading that message. So I wanted to make sure we shared that. Well, Teresa, Scott, Ulla, thank you so much. This has been a really fantastic conversation, and we ran a little bit over in our discussion, so I'm going to stop talking and turn it over for Q&A. We did get one question in the chat that was around the code of conduct, Teresa, that said, or the question was, did you use real employees, those pictures?
Yeah, we had that discussion. Everybody matters at Simpson, and so we thought it was important that we highlight those people that are working on our behalf, and so we did choose real employees. That lag time was long, and we had a retirement right as we were going to press, so we did have to move a bit. But there is nothing so more rewarding than seeing, somebody who's producing our product on the floor, holding up the code of conduct because they're on the cover. And it's just a celebration of who we are. So yes, we used real people.
I love that. And BMO used real people as well in the video.
Yeah, we always use real people. Can I answer the question that's in the question from Albert Cruz?
Please.
About students, because this is something that I do a lot of and spend a lot of time thinking of. I think the best advice would be for them to get comfortable speaking up, and it doesn't have to be speaking up, but just raising their hands and asking questions. And there's a way to frame things, and I'm not even speaking about when they see something really, really wrong or bad, but even at the beginning, if somebody asks you to do something and you don't understand why, and it doesn't have to be a bad thing, just even your work assignment is not clear, or you can't do it, or you're not sure, or you're going to have to, or you have a family issue and you can't do it. The better that people get at raising their hands and asking for help, the better it's going to be overall, because it generates comfort. And then when you get faced with a big issue or a big crisis, then you're going to feel more comfortable actually having that conversation. And I think that those of us that were born and raised in North America, we are taught from a very, very young age to mind our own business and to not get involved and to just, run away. And I tell that to my, teenage daughter too. Don't be in the middle of all the whatever bad stuff is happening or crazy, but it doesn't help in a work environment if everybody just does their own thing. So that's what I would advise. And that's what I do tell people that are coming in, and even those that are just coming into BMO, coming out of school, to get used to saying, I don't understand, I need help. And that's it's an underdeveloped skill for sure.
I'm so glad that you highlighted that, because I feel that it's so often kind of in ethics and compliance space that we measure whether we measure speaking up about misconduct, like so your hotline reports, hotline rates, etc. But this idea of speaking up in general, asking questions, I don't understand why are we doing it this way, doesn't seem to make sense with our values, or I just don't understand what you're talking about. We found that that's such a strong leading indicator of speaking up about misconduct. So if you want one, you need to have the other. So I appreciate that you brought that up. Any other questions from anyone for Teresa, Scott, or Ulla? Okay. Well, we are just at time anyway. So Teresa, Scott, Ulla, thank you so much for joining and for sharing your stories today. And thank you everyone who tuned in. We'll be sending a recording around the CEU certification and our recent report exploring this topic. So be on the lookout for that in your inbox in a few days, and have a great Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.